I have to start the session with just a little bit of a caveat. There are a couple of GIFs that might move around a little bit on the screen, so I'll kind of give you a bit of warning when they're coming up a little bit later on. And I also have to kind of start with a little bit of a confession as well. If you have come from health data sciences to this session, it's going to be a little bit familiar to the session that you did do with me earlier on today. But hopefully you found it that useful that you've come along to do that one. Again, why ever you would do that, I don't know, but here you are. So thanks ever so much for that. So this session, so for those who don't know me, my name's Sam Saunders. I'm an educational developer in the Centre for Innovation in Education, and I've been talking about redesigning assessments or assessments in the context of generative AI for quite some time now, and it's kind of not going anywhere. So what I thought we'd do today is have a little bit of a discussion around some ideas for the process for redesigning some of our assessments in the era of generative AI and sort of contextualizing them against the university's sort of overall position on the technology. And we could get into a conversation around the university's position on it, but I gather that there's been a conversation around that as part of AI Fest already. So hopefully it won't descend into a conversation around that a little bit too much, but it will touch on what the university's position on AI kind of is or could be, and has been, I suppose, over the last sort of 12 months or so, and also kind of contextualize that against the developments within the technology itself, and a little bit of a discussion about what we can actually do to engage with the technology in a way that's sort of long-lasting and that kind of takes into account the fact that it's going to become less conscious, or that's sort of the argument I'm going to make today. It's sort of embedding itself into everyday bits of technology that require less conscious use of artificial intelligence technology. It's just going to kind of be something that exists within all of the systems that we use on an everyday basis, as opposed to something we kind of consciously go and use. So that's the kind of point of the session today, to kind of think about how we might incorporate artificial intelligence into our assessment design, and think about spaces where artificial intelligence could be used within the assessment process, but in a way where it doesn't actually matter if the student has used it or not. They've still kind of evidenced learning, they've still met the learning outcome, they've still shown us that they've progressed from one stage to another, and that they're still able to show that they actually know something about their subject. And we'll kind of end the session a bit later on with an activity where we sort of consider all of the questions that I'm going to basically raise in the first part of the session, and think about how we could apply that to our own module area. And we'll sort of see if we can actually get AI to help us use to do that process. Just before I kick off, does that kind of make sense? Just give us some visual thumbs up if that's okay, if I've said anything completely and utterly bizarre. There are a few thumbs. Thank you ever so much for that. Perfect. Thank you. Okay. So as I say, the aims of the session really are just to kind of discuss the current picture of generative AI, both inside and outside of assessment and academic context, and consider assessing process rather than product. And I kind of want to caveat that statement as well. I've been saying let's assess process, not product, for a little while now. And someone pointed out to me this morning that it might make sense to actually do both, which I thought was a good point, that we could probably assess process and product, I guess, but to focus more on the process of learning, I guess, and how the product has been arrived at, rather than the actual just kind of artifact itself that the student produces at the end of whatever journey, I hate that word, but whatever journey they've kind of been on. And then to discuss and sort of generate ideas for assessments that are relevant to what the student's done, that are authentic. That's a very kind of loaded term. We'll come back to a discussion about what that means another day, I think, and that are scalable, because one of the kind of things that gets pointed out to me a lot when I have this conversation with academics is, how am I supposed to do this for a module that's got X number of students on it, which is a good point, and where AI can be used kind of without detrimental effect to the impact of the assessment, or the way that the assessment kind of adequately measures whether the student has learned something or not. And then think about how we might implement these ideas in practical terms. So what I'm going to do in terms of delivering the session itself, I'm going to start with just a little bit of context on the developments of generative AI technology and how it might develop / is developing. I've used the slides in this sort of development session quite a lot. And what I quite like about it is that it started off with just kind of a slide on OpenAI and ChatGPT, and look, this is the thing. And as I've kind of gone over this a few times, it's sort of developed into like more and more as we've gone. It started off with ChatGPT, then it was ChatGPT and something else, then it was ChatGPT and about 3 or 4 other things, and now it's absolutely everywhere, and it's sort of developing in a really interesting way. And eventually I'll have a presentation where I just talk about what AI has done over the last sort of 6 months to a year. Sorry, my mouse is messing up. I'll use the keyboard instead. And then what we'll do is we'll talk about, we'll have a little bit of a discussion about assessing process rather than product. And as I said before, it's probably more assessing process as well as product. I might change that for this session going forward, because I think focusing on the way the student has kind of approached the task and the journey that they've undertaken to get to the end point is just as important as the thing that they submit at the end. And actually, we can think about how that artifact they submit at the end kind of represents that journey. In as much as the artifact itself evidences the thing we're actually looking for, because it's very easy to forget that the student, in that kind of interaction that we have with the assessment, we look at the assessment and say, how well does it do this thing? Whereas we don't ask ourselves, how has the student got here, and how have they formulated these sort of conclusions? And then we'll open up a sort of idea space to develop new ideas for assessment where it might not matter if AI is used, and we'll talk about the context where that can take place. And then we'll do a bit of feedback, discussion, and some ideas for some next steps as well. So the current iteration of AI, and apologies if you've seen these slides before, I tend to use them quite a lot, but as I say, I keep updating them with new things. So you might sort of get an updated version of it. Obviously, the big kind of major players are still OpenAI, Gemini in the middle, and increasingly Copilot on the right-hand side. And Copilot is sort of working its way into MS Office sort of applications. You'll see it in Edge. You'll see it whenever you do a Bing search. You'll get a sort of AI version of your search results, and you can sort of get hold of Copilot as an app on your phone now as well. And those are kind of the major players, I suppose. And obviously they've kind of undergone various different iterations. I don't need to sort of spend ages waxing lyrical about the different kind of apps that are available, but these are the ones that are kind of the most conscious, I think, that we sort of know. We think of generative AI, we think of these sort of systems or platforms. And ChatGPT particularly is been quite savvy, I think, in how it's developed itself, because now it's sort of a platform where you can make your own versions of it, as it were, that do very specific tasks. And we in CIE, as many people know, we have quite a lot of different ones that do specific tasks for very specific purposes. And I could spend ages talking about the way they've been marketed, and the way that they kind of operate, and the sort of conscious use that students kind of make of it. And these are the ones I think anyway that students will use the most. ChatGPT particularly, and lots of people still use ChatGPT and generative AI interchangeably. That it's, I'm using AI, you're using ChatGPT, but obviously others are available. But it's far more than just the kind of major players, obviously. So I tend to show this slide off. This is off a website called There's an AI for That, which I would recommend if you haven't already seen it, going to have a look at it. And this is a sort of a collation space, if you like, an amalgamation of all the different kind of AIs that people have submitted to this website. And it tends to be a space where you can sort of go and find an AI for a really specific purpose. It does tend to homogenize them. So you'll find AIs by big companies on there next to something that someone's kind of made in their basement. And they'll kind of be given equal weighting. But if they're sort of organized by category, organized by task, and there are some really sort of oddly specific ones. I quite like the one on the right-hand side that says Grape GPT, which is a wine recommender. I quite like that idea. I'm still suspicious. I've said this to a few people. I'm suspicious of that one on the top left that's Fast Eulogy. I think that's a very odd task to sort of generate an AI for. Why would you want an AI to do that for you? But it's an interesting kind of point. But my point is that there are kind of smaller AIs and little AIs that do very specific things. And that's kind of the direction the technology sort of went in, I guess, at its early sort of point. We developed more specific AIs for specific purposes, and this website is still going. And the last time I updated these slides, there were 11,000 AIs for a number of specific tasks and jobs on this. And I updated this relatively recently, and there's now 16.5. So they're obviously still kind of moving forwards, and they're marketed as, for completing specific tasks or jobs. And what I think is really interesting is that this has now popped up as well. The search bar on There's an AI for That now uses AI to kind of search for itself. So you're now kind of using AI to find different AI tools, as it were. It's getting sort of slightly meta, I think, as well. And this idea of sort of integrating AI into other apps, I think, is the direction the technology is going to go. And this has real implications for assessment design going forward as well. So, this idea that the AI will kind of integrate itself into technology that already exists, and that we'll stop kind of using it consciously. And I've pointed this out to a few people as well. If you use Google Docs, you might see an icon like this on the side of your document. And if you do pay for Copilot, you'll get an equivalent version in Word as well that does kind of open up a space for a writing assistant, as it were. And then you can put in a prompt in that, and then it will sort of create the document on the page for you. So it's becoming more integrated into apps that already exist. And this happens in Photoshop, various other sort of third-party apps or specific apps that we already had before the advent of generative AI now have a kind of AI component. within them that's really marketable. There are adverts for it everywhere, and I'll sort of talk about that a little bit more in a second as well. But my point is, it's becoming less conscious. It's less, at the moment, it's still conscious, but it's going to get less conscious. We'll go into an app that we already use, and there'll be AI in it somewhere. I mean, I've pointed this out. I will point this out again. Sorry, this is it on eBay. You know, you can use AI to write your description of an item if you're selling it. It's also baked into Duolingo as well. If you pay for it, you get a sort of AI version of the exercises that will sort of analyze what you're doing and give you tailored feedback. I've also noticed, and I think a few people probably will have as well, you know, it's sort of popping up on your searches when you search for something on the internet, particularly, as I've mentioned before, the Bing chat one earlier on in the session, but it does happen on Google as well. There's an AI version of your search results that sort of pop up at the side of your page. You can write your LinkedIn post using AI if you want to. Don't know why you would, but you could. And then I don't know if anyone's seen this advert. I mean, if you've been on YouTube or if you own a television, I assume you probably have at some point. This is one of those adverts I can hear without even having to kind of have the music playing. But it's sort of everywhere, and you know, we are seeing sort of actual pieces of technology, your phones, your Google Pixels, your Samsung phones now being marketed as having AI baked into them. So that the progress of the technology is for it to become less conscious in the way that we interact with it. I think that's the overall point I kind of want to make for this sort of short section here. And there are real kind of implications for assessment design, because we're obviously thinking about how students are going to use AI, which implies a kind of conscious choice to use AI, but it will just become part and parcel of how they interact with their technology to be able to create whatever artifact it is we're giving them. So it needs to be of a design where it doesn't matter if they do or they don't. And it's not something we can kind of bury our heads in the sand about, I think, going forward. Are there any questions on this at this point? I'm conscious that I can't see anybody, so I don't know if this is going down well or not, but are you all kind of with me so far, and does this make sense up to this point? A thumbs up will do. Yep, Rob, thanks for that. Perfect. Yep, a few others popping up as well. Oh, that's good feedback, good formative assessment. Perfect. Let's just say we are makes sense. Thank you. We kind of can't bury our heads in the sand really about this. Obviously, you know, I'm from CIE. It wouldn't be a session from CIE if we didn't mention the Liverpool Curriculum Framework at some point. You know, we have got digital fluency sort of baked into this. That kind of puts the responsibility on us, obviously, to help our students to become digitally fluent. Whether that actually kind of encompasses AI in the long term, simply because it will become how we use technology, if I'm correct in my kind of prediction, it kind of remains to be seen. But it does mean that we need to be as literate with the technology as our students are. And if we're using it on an everyday basis, that kind of means we need to engage with it, at least consciously for now. And obviously, it's also baked into Strategy 2031 as well, the integration of artificial intelligence into our curriculum. So, and what that kind of means is that there needs to be a sort of multi-pronged approach to how we examine generative AI. And I know that you've had a session on the kind of policy and philosophical position of AI already as part of this set of sessions this week. So I'm not going to spend too much time talking about this, but obviously the mitigation approach is something that lots of people have tried, but adaptation and integration is really kind of where we tend to land, and that kind of leads into literacy and transparency, because we can't adapt our and integrate our assessments and our learning kind of materials and incorporate AI into them if we're not literate with the technology and we're not transparent about how we use them. So what that then means is that, you know, literacy around the technology is where we should start, and that kind of goes hand in hand with using the technology in a transparent kind of way. We are unable to describe what we've done if we're not literate with the technology, and we're not able to discuss it if we're not transparent about it either. So those two things kind of circulate around each other. And there's no way to detect the use of AI either. So there's a real temptation among lots of people across the sector to try and stop students using it. And not just because of what you might term Ludditism, but simply because of overwork or any other kind of social pressure. But there's no way to detect it. There's no way to kind of stop it. And as I've already kind of argued as part of this session, it's going to become less conscious. So we're not going to be, you know, even if we detect it, there's no way to actually see that the student has done it deliberately or not. And as to say, the Turnitin detector provides a prediction rather than a quantified score, and it's also been turned off. So there's not much we can do in terms of detecting it. So as a result, we've got to be open, honest, and transparent about it. And this is baked into our assessment processes. Where in our assessment can we provide a space for our students to tell us what they've done? with generative AI? Where in the assessment, and these are rhetorical questions, obviously, where in the assessment is there a space for students to use AI, reflect on AI, include their prompts, discuss its impact, and actually kind of engage with the technology in a way that helps them to consolidate and apply their knowledge and show us what they can do, as opposed to using it to try and circumvent the requirements of the assessment. It needs to be kind of within the instructions, if you like, or within the parameters of the assessment itself. So this does include declaring when AI has been used. That's one of the kind of most basic, but also effective solutions that we've seen across the institution, and various departments already have a methodology through which they ask students to declare whether they have or haven't used artificial intelligence in the construction of that assessment. The next step, obviously, from that is creating a space where students can reflect on how effective it's been and what it is they've actually done. And that's obviously something that we can engage with and we can potentially mark. At its most basic level, it's citing the use of the technology and including the prompts. And as I say, at its more kind of complex level, it's reflecting on its efficiency and how well it's actually been incorporated into the journey of the assessment. And that is something that we can kind of embed into policy. We can ask students to declare whether they've used it or not and to reflect on it. We can't tell them not to use it, but we can tell them to tell us whether they have or they haven't. And actually that can kind of be incorporated into marking criteria as well. So we have kind of reflected that in policy as well. And as I say, I'm not going to spend too long talking about that, particularly because the question of the session, as far as I'm aware, was, can we ever have a good one? And at the moment, I don't want to know the answer, but I'll probably find out later. I'm just going to plug the resources from CIE very quickly on generative AI if you've not seen them already. So we have got the homepage, all the policy and guidance is on there, and the generative AI on demand, and all of the resources from the library is linked on the homepage as well. And if you haven't seen that already, I'd be very surprised, but I just thought I'd put it into the session. Okay. Any questions on any of this before I move on to the next short bit? You're very compliant. I'm quite happy about this. Fantastic. Okay, good. Thank you, Sandra. So assessing process, not product. I did kind of mention this very briefly at the beginning, and I have to thank Claire, who I think is on the call, for this as well, because it was Claire who put me into this direction a few weeks ago in the first place. But assessing process, not product. Again, I'm going to kind of change this to be assessing process and product. I think, in the future. This comes from Lodge et al. 2023. So the idea that evidencing the process of learning over time and context can support a much better understanding of learner sense-making processes than just the artifact that takes place at the end of a given kind of learning period, if you like, and what they ultimately know and can do. We should focus just as much on the process of how they've built that knowledge and in what context, as much as we should focus on the thing they can do at the end. And that can be through a mixture of formative and summative assessment. It can be through a mixture of continuous assessment type sort of strategies, or it can be portfolio-based stuff. Anything that kind of tells us the overall journey of the student from the beginning to the end, or it can be within the artifact at the end, but that focuses on the particular journey of the student. And as a result, they argue that learning tasks should provide opportunities to reveal their thinking, their competencies and their other qualities that are embedded in the learning outcomes. And there was a phrase that I saw a few weeks ago that I really quite like, and I need to find who it was attributed to. But essentially it said that assessment in the age of artificial intelligence is a progression from the presentation of ideas through to the defense of views. And I thought that was a really interesting way of putting it, because it kind of requires students to show how they've reached that conclusion throughout a cognitive process, as it were. What's your thought process behind this? How have you arrived at this conclusion? Not what is the conclusion. We want to know that too, but we want to know how you've got there and what's actually given you the inspiration to reach that conclusion. So what, and again, another rhetorical question, what opportunity is there in the assessment for students to show their thought processes? Showing their working, I suppose, is the way we might want to put it. But the learning task should provide an opportunity to reveal that thought process, not just the conclusion, and obviously rationalize that against learning tasks that they've done on the course or outside the course, as it were. And that should be unique to the student in theory, because they've all reached that conclusion in a way that makes sense to them. So how are we able to kind of incorporate that into the learning task is something that I'd like participants today to think a little bit about. And as I say, assessment tasks should provide opportunities for feedback on the products of student work, i.e. the essay or the lab report or the brief or the video submission or whatever, that reflect that critical thinking, judgment, the decision-making, the ethical decision-making, and the reflection on that process. So again, moving from that presentation of ideas to the defense of a view. You've got a thought process, you've got an argument, you've got a perspective based on your knowledge of this your course content, of your disciplinary content. How are you going to defend that? What material, what content, what information, what knowledge, what reading have you done that can back that up? And how have you interpreted that? How have you processed it? How have you arrived at this conclusion? And this is something that artificial intelligence, it's not that it can't do it, but that it's much worse at it. It can't reason and provide an opinion, I suppose, in the same way as a human can. It just kind of gives you the facts, or it will give you a very sort of bog standard opinion, or it will give you a very non-committal, I suppose, opinion on something as well. I argued with it over whether Brexit was a good idea a few months ago, and I couldn't get it to give me a response because it just sort of refused to. And as I say, these are components of the process that AI is far less able to simulate. It's not particularly good at this. And if we ask students to showcase the journey they've undergone, I know I keep using that word, then we're much more likely to get an authentic response. And actually, we're also more likely to get a response where it doesn't matter if the student has used AI in certain contexts, because it's not the thing we're looking for. We're looking for their defense of the view, but how they've kind of constructed the way that they present that might not be the thing that actually matters in that assessment context. So in some examples, we can see, I mean, Logitech do give us some examples of this kind of taking place. So hopefully we can sort of apply this. So for example, a physics department might seek to break a large assessment into constituent parts, showing changes over time. So the students provide evidence of their critical thinking by showing their decision making. So what decision did we make, and why did we make it, and what backs that up, and what effect did it have, including those dead ends. So what happened and this didn't work, so we went back and tried something else. And then how the task relates to relevant practicals and tutorials. So this is another point that's probably worth focusing on as well. Is there something on the module, or is there something in the course content that's specific that the AI is not aware of? So if they've done an experiment in, say, week 6, or something that the assessment directly refers to, think back to your experiment in week 6, or think back to the case study we did, or think back to whatever it is you did in your group, or something like that, and then reflect on that in the assessment context. And they can't ask AI to do that for them because the AI didn't do that, obviously. So there's a space for stuff that happened on the module, I suppose, to kind of help focus the student on something that the AI is completely unaware of. So in this example, the assignment would then be a collection of evidence of student processes rather than the final product. So the focus is on how that product is then derived, not how generative AI simulates its derivation at the end. And in a kind of less hard science discipline, in a law subject, students undertake an essay arguing a position on a legal issue that iteratively builds on feedback from different sources, so from peers, or from the teacher, from themselves, or from generative AI. And the inclusion of the AI requires students to distinguish between the credibility of the sources. So why have you picked that over another one? And then give a rationale for that. That's obviously then backed up by stuff within their field. And the submitted assessable product then focuses on responding to the feedback. So you've chosen this and why. And gathering evidence of the development of their judgment when forming a legal argument. So they have to make an informed decision that's based on knowledge that they've been given via the course, as it were. So the decision is the bit that we're interested in. Why have you made that choice? And what's kind of prompted you to make that choice? And would you make that choice differently again in the future? That's also a good question that AI probably wouldn't be able to respond, because that's a very personalized question that requires quite heavy reflection. Does this all make sense so far? Hopefully I'm going to see a field of thumbs again. Sounds great. Fabulous. 1 thumb. Okay. We're reducing in the number of thumbs. I'm hoping we're still here. Oh, there's a few more. Thank you. Oh, they're hearts. Thanks, Rob. Appreciate that. Oh no, they're all popping up now. You're all doing it in a sort of iterative way. Fabulous. Okay. So that brings us to just about the halfway point of this session. Another thumb over there. Thank you. So what I'd kind of like you to do now is to kind of take all of this stuff that I've mentioned up to this point and have a think about how you might apply that to your own module. And what I'm hopefully going to be able to do is set up some sort of board spaces on interactive things for people to kind of use. Now, I have had issues with accessing some of it earlier on today when I've sort of run this as a sort of dry run. So I'm hoping it works. But maybe it says the remainder of this session. We'll do maybe 15 to sort of 20 minutes ish to identify kind of potential ideas for assessments that could work within your module, component, or curriculum space. And this activity does consist of 2 sections or 2 stages. So you should firstly consider the current assessments that you have on your module or your component and how fit for purpose you consider them to be. So there could be a question around vulnerability to AI if it's used in a certain way, or it could be another potential aspect that you might want to think about. And then think about the issues, if any, that the advent of generative AI has revealed in this process, if any, and what measures you might have taken before to try to sort of account for that, mitigate that, what you've done up this point. And then take all of that and think about what you actually might want to do. What activity, process, etc., would be ideal to effectively assess the knowledge, skills, and the abilities of the student within that specific module or context. What is it that you actually want them to do? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a link to a Padlet board in the chat. And I've put a sample on there already, and that should have just popped up because I should still be sharing my second monitor. So I'm hoping you can see that. But I'm going to copy the link to the clipboard and I'm going to paste it in the chat there. So you should be able to access this. And to kind of help you come up with some ideas, what I've also got is a link to CIE's Assessment Designer GPT. So what this will do, and I'm going to sort of showcase an example of it on the screen here. Can everyone see that? Can someone give me a thumbs up?
Yeah, we got it, Sam.
You got it, thank you. So what this is a custom GPT that makes reference to the framework for higher education qualifications. It also references some various bits of scholarly literature that essentially talk about designing assessments in the age of generative AI and incorporating AI into the process. And it also references the COPA and various kind of bits of policy that are sort of Liverpool specific as well. So the assessment ideas should fit within our frameworks. And all you need to do, and as I say, I'll post a link to this in the chat now, but we've also got a QR code for it as well. There it is. Do please let me know if you can access that. You may need to log in to ChatGPT to get access to it. Some people could when we delivered the session earlier on today, and others found it a little bit trickier. So do let me know if it's working for you. But to use this, you just hit the button that says help me to design an assessment. And then what ChatGPT will do is it will ask you a few questions about the assessment itself. So it'll ask you what subject discipline the assessment is in, what are the learning outcomes. You can just kind of say the skill if you haven't got a learning outcome particularly to hand. So what is the skill you're looking for? Is it critical analysis? Is it evaluation? Is it something else? What level is it? And it asks for how many students will complete the assessment as well. So if you then kind of put all of that into the assessment designer and then sort of press go, it'll give you an idea for an assessment. And what it'll do, in fact, I'm going to bring up one that we did this morning. It will give you an idea for an assessment. So this was from Health Data Sciences. So that was for Health Data Science, assesses the student's ability to critically appraise data-enabled study designs, defend a plan, and evaluate evidence about treatments from observational studies. It's at master's level, and there are around 20 students. And it gave us an idea for an assessment. So a research proposal mixed with an oral defense. And then what it'll do is it'll give you the idea of the task, and then it will give you a specific section about how AI could be incorporated into the assessment. And Health Data Sciences were quite good. They then wanted a rubric for this assessment. So it sort of gives you one on that as well. So as I say, the link to the GPT is in the chat. There's also a QR code on the slides, which I'll bring back up in a second as well. No, that's the wrong GPT. Come on, Sam, figure it out. Where's it gone? Assessment designer, there it is. So I'll just bring my slides back up. There we are. And what we've also got is a set of questions that could be quite useful for you to think about when you're considering your own assessment contexts, right? So think about whether the assessment idea focuses on product rather than process. We've got a visitor, hello. Does the assessment idea allow the student to demonstrate that they've met the learning outcome, even if they've used AI or not? Could you please not get on my keyboard? Does the assessment idea require localized, specific, or dedicated subject content that has been engaged with and actively discussed on the module? So this is what I mentioned before about have they done an experiment in a particular week, or have they done a particular group project that the AI is not aware of? Is the assessment idea multimodal? So does it make use of different forms of information? So that could be text or image or video or sound or something tactile. Does it require evaluative judgment? As I mentioned before, AI isn't particularly good at that. What level of complexity is it? What form is it? And is it something that we could call authentic? So that's a kind of process that you can sort of follow, a self-reflective process. And hopefully that will help you kind of generate some ideas. And what I'd like you to do is use the GPT, use your own kind of knowledge, if you like, to come up with some ideas for an assessment, and then post your ideas on the Padlet with the subject discipline in the subject line, just so we kind of know what space this is kind of taking place in. Does that make sense? Are there any questions, and are there any access issues with the GPT at this point? I really want to make sure it's working. No questions at all, so I assume that that's fine. And I'm hoping, oh, I can see Padlet ideas starting to form. Working for you. Link works for you, Rachel. Thank God for that. Perfect. Okay, so have a go with that. I'll give you maybe 10 minutes, and then we'll go through some of the ideas I'm hoping will appear at some point on the Padlet. Oh no, whoever's typing has stopped. You had to log into GPT, but it's working. Perfect, thank you. Okay. Oh, you're a quiet lot. Oh, she's back. Hello again. You can be our mascot. How's that? Pets are always welcome on Zoom calls. I'll see if she can stay here. Come on, go on your cushion. There we go. Does anyone still need the QR code? I'll bring that back up as well. I'll give it a few minutes, and then I'll see if anything's popped up on the Padlet. If anyone wants to talk their idea through on here as well, that's obviously very welcome as well. Let's see if anything's coming up. No ideas yet. I imagine we're all having fun with the GPT. I'm hoping that's the case. The AI stopped responding after I answered the question. Is there a way to refresh? Does it still show that it's responding at the bottom? So there'll be a stop button. It will appear here. It will look like a stop button. I did wonder if everyone doing it at the same time might cause some problems, but it should be able to manage a few people at once. If it stopped working, I would refresh the page. Should do an example of my own, I think. Okay, so I've done a sort of example assessment here on our GPT. So it asks you obviously which discipline or subject area, what are the outcomes or skills, at what level is it, how many students. I've chosen history for level 4 students. Assesses their ability to evaluate a source given from a list of sources and will take them around 60 students. So it suggested a 1,500 word critical evaluation of the selected source, focusing on its historical significance, reliability, bias, and how it can be used to understand the specific historical event or period. And then it gives you a sort of specific section on how to integrate AI into this process as well. What should we post on the Padlet? Do you want the existing assessment or the AI response or both? I would post just a summary of the idea and actually whether you think it's a good idea or not. Because what I'm interested in and what I think would be interesting for everyone else is to come up with ideas for assessments that incorporate artificial intelligence, but that can be easily implemented. So if you particularly like the idea that's come out of ChatGPT, then by all means summarize that. If you don't like it, but you can think of something else based on what it's given you, then please post that too. It's essentially a collection of assessment ideas for different disciplines that could potentially have AI incorporated in them and that could be quite interesting if implemented in different disciplinary spaces. So just a short summary of what the AI could, what the assessment could otherwise be. And then hopefully the idea is that we can then share that with others afterwards and say, hey, here's a whole list of ideas for assessments in different disciplinary spaces that have a potential for AI to be included in there somewhere. So just a short summary of the assessment idea, not the original one, unless you really think the original one is good, in which case by all means show that. Oh, lots of people writing now. Fantastic. I've been abandoned now. Oh, she's eating. She'd rather eat than get cuddles. Fair enough. Oh, lovely. Thank you. The AI first suggested a project followed by a reflective analysis by the student. I told it I didn't want to mark 200 essays. Yeah, fair enough. Object-oriented programming challenge with code annotations and quizzes. Nice. A coding challenge and then auto-graded quizzes on the other side. Yeah. Excellent. An anatomy spotter exam. AI-enhanced reflection component. Spotter exam will test students' identification of anatomical structures and functions using stations. Either physical, also it's OSCE-like type thing. Fabulous. This is interesting. I didn't think this was an assessment style that could really benefit from an AI component. Would really be at risk of students using AI to answer it. Yeah, fair enough. Marketing, yeah, group campaign design and pitch presentation, and then a reflective report. Yeah, I like that too. Very cool. PGT, a small animal surgery module, put in a module I know actually came up with something very similar to what you currently do. Excellent. With an idea of how to integrate AI into it, which would in fact be quite doable. I love how, I know I'm not an AI kind of enthusiast, which is a weird thing to say at AI Fest. I'm quite skeptical, but I think you need to be when you're talking AI and assessment. But I do love how when this happens, people tend to be like, I'm actually surprised at how useful that is, which is not a bad thing, I suppose. If they submit an AI-generated log where they detail the use of the AI, the prompt use results, etc., and critical effects, how they verified the information from a reputable source. Yeah, that's a good point. Discuss social issue in relation to selected theory, counter arguments, acknowledge alternate viewpoints. Yeah. Suggest a reflective appendix. Describe how AI was used in research and drafting stages. Yeah. Critically evaluate the AI-generated suggestions. And obviously the other part of this is that any kind of assessment that incorporates artificial intelligence into it needs to have a route where the student can do just as well if they don't use it. Because not all students will choose to do so. So if it's an advantage thing, if it gains a student an advantage to use the AI to do the assessment, then obviously there needs to be a way that students could do just as well if they don't. And that's fine, because what it tends to be, at least in these suggestions, is that the AI can help in some respects, but it isn't the thing you're assessing. It just has a place within it to actually help students to progress the assessment forward in their own terms. Nice ending to an essay question on critical reflection. Written reflection on the ethical and practical implications using AI and anatomical analysis. Excellent. Students must reflect on the strengths and weaknesses of the AI-generated insights, how AI shaped their thinking, the role of AI in anatomy education. Can it replace a complement traditional learning methods? I don't know, can it? That sounds interesting. Pre-session English course, reflective defense. I genuinely thought I said reflective dance component. I'm glad it says defense instead. Students have a 10-minute post-essay interview to defend the process and views. Could you please let us know how we can access the recording for today's session, previous sessions run this week? I'm not entirely sure where the recordings are going to be stored, but I imagine the organisers will send out some information around where the recordings are after the entire week is done. Nice tips for writing good MCQs. Cool. Oh, they're added to the Padlet. Oh, yes, there's a schedule. The Padlet schedule is around, and yeah, if the recordings are on there, that sounds good. Is anyone still writing? There's a couple more people writing, so I shall give another couple of minutes before those appear. Ah, thanks for that, Rob. Describe the process of searching for, including using AI tools. Oh, literature review. On a chosen topic, 500 words, then write up the literature review, 2,000 words, write a reflection and evaluation of the whole process, 500 words. That's a nice summary as well. I mean, I suppose the thing we could do, or I should have probably suggested, is if the AI gives you the idea for the assessment, I might see if it works on my example as well. I might say, can you please summarize this in a short paragraph? Then I can post that to the Padlet. I'll watch it. There we go. Perfect. I shall add that one in as well. All right. Okay. No one else is writing, I think, at the top of the Padlet, so I think we can probably call that task done. This has been really interesting, I think, and well, from my perspective, it absolutely has. The AI kind of gives you ideas for incorporating it into the process rather than the actual artifact that's produced at the end, which I think is quite interesting. It seems to be very aware. I mean, it's not aware, it doesn't have an awareness, it doesn't have a consciousness, but it's very aware of its own position as a threat. And I quite liked the example from the session we did on this morning, where it sort of said, no, you need an oral component to this assessment because that's the thing you're actually kind of wanting to test. I'm kind of gratified to see that there are at least a couple of examples on here where your person who's kind of using the GPT assessment designer is sort of surprised, if you like, that the assessment could incorporate an AI function within it somewhere. And even if it's a sort of in-person assessment, rather like this, where you've got sort of physical models or stations where students are doing stuff, they could sort of talk about their knowledge of how AI tools can enhance their sort of study techniques or clinical applications or something like that. So, there is always kind of a space for this kind of thing within the assessment design. And what I'd like to sort of suggest is to use this tool. If you've got an idea for an assessment, or if you've got assessments on your modules that you might not think have a space for an artificial intelligence component to it, or that you think are maybe not AI proof, but AI resistant, I suppose, maybe a better word, to think about whether that's actually the case or not, and whether you think the assessment assesses process as well as product, and also asks students to sort of reflect on their use of technology as well. I'm just going to have a look at the chat to see if there are any questions. So there are a couple. Many AI elements seem to involve a reflective task. What's the likelihood that this itself can be AI generated, especially as it's likely to comprise only a small proportion of the mark? I mean, the reflexive component to AI tends to be quite surface level. We're doing a study with some academics in psychology at the minute on the kind of position of artificial intelligence in individual assessment context, where we're sort of doing a think aloud study and having a look at individual assessments and sort of thinking essentially this process through on a much sort of smaller scale. Obviously, it's on a kind of one-to-one basis, and whether the AI can actually sort of do the assessment for the student. And the sort of theme that is sort of emerging from those conversations is that, yeah, AI is actually quite interesting to reflect on when it's trying to do the task. We could get students to generate a sample of a piece of work that students then reflect on as a group, or in an in-class test, or in an asynchronous kind of activity. And when we ask AI itself to reflect on itself, it tends to be quite surface level. In fact, when it produces anything, and again, it's difficult to say that it produces anything because all it's doing is kind of reformulating existing material and repurposing that, repackaging it, and reprinting it for you in a sort of alternate format. It's not creating anything new. But when it tries to reflect on something, it does tend to be quite surface level. It's not in depth, and it's usually not informed by something specific to the discipline or the module, or the course content. So then they need to reflect on whatever it is in the context of the discipline that they're working in, as opposed to just whether it's a good choice or not. And so that can help if you ask them to reflect on it with reference to something very specific, like I mentioned before, if it's something they've done on the course, or if it's something that's very specific to their discipline, or it's something very specific to that course, then that's going to help them reflect more effectively. And actually, it sort of defeats the point of reflection if they're just going to get AI to do it for them, obviously. Some probably will. And the argument that people have made before about some students will do anything to cheat, obviously, is definitely still very much the case here as well. Rachel, you can even ask the GPT how to ensure students don't use Gen AI in their reflections. That's a good point. I'd be interested to know what it says as well. Any other thoughts on this first? Is there a list of suggested AIs/GPTs that CIE likes? We do tend to be ChatGPT. We have a license for it in CIE. I don't know if that's just because it was the first one, or whether it was because the one we think is best. My advice would be to think about access for the students. So which kind of AI is most accessible for the student on a wider level, I guess, and whether they can access it for free. Because obviously we can't ask students to use preferred AIs that are premium, and then obviously some students can't access them because they can't afford it, or because they're unwilling to pay for it, which is fair enough. So no, there is not really a list of prescribed AI/GPTs that CIE uses, or that the university uses. There's no kind of institutional wide license for a specific AI that we're going to use. So we tend to sort of focus on the free ones. Some institutions have designed their own AI, which sort of circumvents the ethical/sustainability and bias-based kind of criticisms of the technology itself, because obviously that's something that we've designed in-house, and therefore they know the process of what's gone into building it and maintaining it, etc. Which is something that I think we could explore. I don't know whether that's the case or whether it's even possible at the minute. And in terms of finding an institutional license for an AI, I don't think the conversation's moved forward very much. Yes, Rob's pointed out that Copilot is the only institutionally supported Gen AI model which is accessed through Edge. It's not something, as far as I'm aware, that we pay for. It just happens to kind of be there. So if you access Microsoft Edge and then search for something, you'll see an AI. Or if you scroll up on the home page, I think it does take you to a specific platform to engage with Copilot, which you could get students to do, because obviously they will have access to that through the university, or failing that, they could use ChatGPT. But obviously the associated necessity of creating an account, and also the fact that it may train the data model if they put things into it. So obviously the huge caveat is be careful with the information that's being put into the AI as well. Okay. Any other questions on this before I move on to the very last couple of bits? Is there a list of tools with what they might be good for, plus whether they're free, subscription-based, and other useful info, i.e. whether you've limited to 10 questions/interactions, etc.? Actually, no, as far as I know, we don't have a sort of list of AIs that you could use, unless Rob could correct me on this, but I'm not aware of one. But it's not a bad idea. We could certainly put something like that together. One for the on-demand course. Yeah, possibly there's one there already. So yeah, do check on that. Yeah, sort of crib sheet of available. I think that the issue with that is obviously that the AIs are changing kind of daily. So it's something that we'd have to kind of update very, very regularly to sort of, as things change and as the sort of technology becomes more ubiquitous, it's going to become less useful, because obviously it'll just be something that exists within our phones or in our office suites and things like that. So there's no conscious use of AI. Like I said at the beginning of the session, it's going to be very sort of embedded in our just interactions with technology. So the list of apps won't be particularly helpful, because it will just be in everything. But yeah, for now, while we are still using specific AIs, that could actually be a very good idea. Yeah, and thanks, Rob, also for the link to the generative AI on demand as well. And as I say, I'll share the slides. There is a QR code that takes you to all of CIE's resources on generative AI. Wonderful. I shall go back to my slides and I shall just finish a few things off. Any other questions on that just before I do? No. Fantastic. I mean, that's kind of everything that I had for this session. I hope it's been useful. I will circulate this Padlet with all the different assessment ideas as part of the resources that come out of all of the sessions this week. We did have a kind of feedback and discussion section, but I think it's safe to say we probably already have done that. So all that's left really for me to do, just a couple of minutes before the end of the session, is just to say a huge thank you to everyone for coming along to the session today. I hope it's been interesting. I hope it's been useful. And if you do have any questions or you want to carry on the discussion around designing assessments for AI, we'll check that with David in CIE about access denied for the AI on demand. That's it shouldn't be doing that. So we'll check into that. Thanks, Amy. I'll make a note of it. AI on demand. Thank you. Wonderful. Other than that, thank you ever so much, everybody. I hope it's been helpful, and I'll see everyone again very soon. Thank you so much.